Hey guys, welcome back to our continuing coverage of the Chicago Comic and Entertainment Expo. My name's Chuck from the YouTube show Chuckload of Comics.
And I'm Ryan from the Chumpcast.
All the shows you see this weekend are going to be simulcast on the YouTube show Chuckload of Comics and anywhere the Chumpcast can be found. Joining us here in the booth, first guest of the convention from Mad Magazine, the one, the only Mr. Tom Richmond. Tom, we got to make this an annual thing.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Last time we saw you, came to our booth. We were sitting down with the guys from All Yeah Comics. We talked a lot about your history with Mad Magazine. What we didn't get to talk a lot about was sort of your process, how you approach projects, how you the first thing you look at when you're doing a caricature. So hopefully a little bit later on we might do some sketching.
Sure.
But talking about Mad real quick, Mad had a crazy year last year. I mean, it was a total sort of a flip the script on Mad Magazine, running after what, like 50-something years. They relaunched under a modern size, and they don't even do the movie caricatures anymore.
Yeah, a lot of changes. You know, a couple years ago they moved from New York to Burbank and to the DC Comics offices, and none of the Mad staff went with them except one guy from production.
Really?
So that was the end of a real era, because up until that point, all the editors and art directors were an extension of the Bill Gaines era that started in back in the 50s.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So they all learned from the previous generation, and it sort of kept that vibe together, totally cut off. And so they hired Bill Morrison to be the new editor, and Bill was a great guy and really knew humor and stuff, but he was never part of the original Mad. So it was a totally different voice, I thought they did a good job of still keeping it Mad and yet updating it into the 21st century, but then, you know how it is, Bill got let go and the staff got reduced, and the next thing you know, now they're doing mostly reprint material and classic material every issue, and only maybe 20% new stuff.
I do miss the movie parodies. I mean, that was like one of the staples of Mad Magazine. Is like right there in the centerfold is the Tom Richmond movie parodies.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a classic part that's not there anymore.
Yeah, that was something that really hit home, because I did so many of those over the last 20 years, and like you say, it's a identifiable Mad Magazine staple, and now they aren't doing them anymore. It was one very specific thing they cut out. But maybe that genre is going to continue, because Desmond Devlin, who is a writer for Mad for about 35 years, and myself, we collaborated on, something like 50 movie and TV parodies in the last 20 years. Well, we've got a little project, and we're going to maybe see a Kickstarter happen sometime next month.
Really?
And we're going to try to see if we can continue the movie and TV parody tradition.
Is this an official announcement on the Chumpcast Chuckload of Comics YouTube show?
It's an official, unofficial announcement. There are
we have applause from the audience out there.
There are a few details to work out, but Des and I, we've been doing this for decades, and we've got a lot to plan. In fact, work is being done. So,
do you just have ideas like spilling over that you've been sitting on? Like, oh my God, this movie is perfect for, the Alfred E. Newman treatment or anything like that?
Well, I'll tell you what the genesis of the idea was. That for the first time since Mad started, in the history of Mad and the history of Star Wars movies, Rise of Skywalker will be the first movie that will not be parodied in Mad Magazine.
Oh, that's a shame.
That's crazy.
So guess what our first movie parody is going to be?
Excellent. Oh, what are you going to call it? You already have a name picked out for Rise of Skywalker?
I don't know if I should tell you that.
Oh, you got to go to the Kickstarter.
We got to warm up a little more first.
Yeah, but that's our first one. But we're going to do new movies and maybe some TV shows too. But we're also going to do some of the movies that Mad never did.
Yeah.
Classics, that are cult classics, and movies that later on became big deals, but at the time they didn't get the treatment.
That is awesome.
So you'll see a mix of classic movies and new stuff, and it should be fun. And Des and I are old hands at it, so we'll see where it goes. But it's going to be a lot of fun.
When is the Kickstarter launch?
Next month.
Yeah.
Don't have an exact date, but we're looking at probably right around the middle of the month, and it's going to be a hardcover book.
Oh, nice.
Shooting for about 84 pages, but we'll have some stretch goals to add some extra pages as we go along. And
maybe a foldover or two?
No, I don't know about that. I'll have to call Al Jaffe and see if he'll let us do that.
Well, guys, find the Tom Richmond Kickstarter launching in a month or so, and
Yeah.
definitely, pour your money into it, because this is an art form that's got to live on, the movie parodies Mad Style. But speaking of Mad Style art, while we have you here, I've always wanted to know, what are, when you approach, because your book right here, which I've read cover to cover 2 times,
Awesome.
some amazing, the way you approach pieces is almost mathematical. You've got certain things that you look for when you, take my friend Smithers here, for example. To sketch him, what's one of the first things you look at? What do you do when you're tackling a sketch?
Well, there's 2 aspects to caricature, really. There's what I call the physical nature of a face, which is just your features, right? So, the size of your chin doesn't change and the size of your nose doesn't change. That's just the physical nature of the face. And then there's what I call the presence of a person. That's their personality, their presence, whatever you want to call it. And you're exaggerating both aspects. So, yeah, if you've got a big nose, that's obviously going to be something I'll exaggerate. But I'm also looking to exaggerate what makes you you. What makes you unique from other people in terms of your expression, your attitude, your personality, for whatever reason. I'm trying to exaggerate those things too. So raised eyebrows and crooked grins and things like that bring out the personality of somebody. You exaggerate those elements too. So.
Would you have time to maybe do a quick sketch of our friend Smithers here?
Sure.
Oh boy.
I'll probably use this photo since you won't have headphones on.
I think you said something about your nose earlier.
I'm wondering, if anybody ever walked up to you and just tried to start making fun of you, would you just decimate them immediately, pointing out all of their tiniest little flaws? I assume that nobody can touch you in terms of that.
Well, sadly, that's how I go through life. It's like I see everybody as a caricature, and
that's got to be torture.
It sort of is, in a lot of ways. It's very distracting in life. Like my wife and I have, we like theater, and we go see, musicals a lot. And we'll go to this show, and on the way home, she'll be saying, she'll ask me, so what'd you think about, the show? What'd you think about this number and all this stuff? And I'll be like, I don't remember a thing about that show, because there was this guy in the chorus that had this enormous forehead. And every time he was on stage, I was like, look at that forehead. How can he even stand up? And it distracts me, and it ruins
Forget
the
his
rest
singing
of it.
voice.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I can't watch a John Travolta movie without seeing this pin.
Big
that's,
giant, yeah.
This nail that's been nailed into his chin.
Right.
This dimple that really is an impossible hole in his...
Kirk Douglas butt chin. Tom Cruise, I'm sure, has some features
tooth.
you like to accentuate.
Tom Cruise has one big middle tooth.
Does
so
he?
Yeah, it's very strange.
Yeah.
If you Google Tom Cruise middle tooth, it will come up.
I don't think I want to do that, because once you see it, you can't unsee it.
It will never leave your brain.
That's true. His front teeth are off center, and one of his front teeth is in the exact middle of the axis of his face.
Guys,
he's
don't
good.
ruin Tom Cruise for me.
Oh,
Well,
that's what ruined
sorry.
Tom Cruise for you?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm a big Tom Cruise fan. Tom, if you're watching this,
You can
I
go on
like your
Chuckload
middle
of Comics.
tooth. I like your middle tooth just where it is, right in the middle.
So I got to ask, Mad Magazine was a huge impact on my smartass, sense of humor as a kid. How old were you when you drew your first Alfred E. Newman?
Oh wow, that's a good question. I discovered Mad right around 4th grade, somewhere in there.
That's the perfect time for
Yeah,
it.
and my buddy had a subscription, and so whenever he got his copy, then we'd go over there and read it cover to cover, and then we would draw our own parodies of stuff. Early on, I was a big Don Martin fan, and I loved the Don Martin cartoons, so I would draw my own Don Martin characters with the floppy feet and that type of thing. And we also did, we made up the wacky packages sort of stuff, which isn't really Mad, but sort of in the same Mad vein. And so we would do that. So probably I drew Alfred maybe around 4th, 5th grade.
That's so cool.
We would throw him in to things that we were doing, and that was a lot of fun. And that was my first exposure to Mad. And then I, like a lot of times you sort of grow past that, and I started, reading regular comics and that kind of thing. And then when I got a job doing caricatures at a theme park while I was going to college.
I read that in your book.
And so my first summer, I moved down to Chicago, right down here. Was at Great America, right
Yeah.
up the road here. That's where we did them. And I lived with a bunch of other caricaturists, and they all had these stacks of Mad magazines with them, and I hadn't seen one in probably about 5, 6, 7 years, and so I looked at them and I was like, wow, was the artwork this brilliant when I was reading it when I was in 4th grade? And sure enough, I went back to all my old stuff, and Mort Drucker, Jack Davis, Angela Torres, Al Jaffe, all that stuff was just, I mean, that was what was so awesome about Mad. Was it was funny, it was juvenile. Sergio. It was funny, it was juvenile in times, it was smart at times, but they had some of the biggest legends in comics ever drawing for them. I mean, their lineup was ridiculous.
Absolutely.
Just Hall of Famers from top to bottom.
Right. And the comedy is like it's the kind of thing you only appreciate more the older you get. You can go back and read a comic, a Mad magazine that you read when you were a kid, read it again with completely different eyes, and it's a whole nother book.
Yeah, it's very funny to go back and see the old stuff because, they're making fun of like hippie culture and things that are, a
lot of drug references.
Yeah, very much in the moment at the time.
Oh, yes.
And some of that stuff didn't age real well. It's like, but a lot of it was very astute. And when you're reading it today, you're like, wow, they were sort of ahead of their time predicting some of this stuff was going to happen, and it was pretty interesting.
It's funny. I actually read, it was published, I think it was like in the late 80s. The article in Mad was headlines you're never, ever, ever going to see as long as you live. And one of them was Cleveland Indians and Chicago Cubs beat Cleveland Indians in the World Series.
Wow, that's like the Back to the Future.
Yeah, it was insanity.
Just
like,
a year
once
on.
that happened, it was just all over the news. They're like, oh, let's look back at Mad Magazine from 20 years ago, and they predicted Indians Cubs.
That's beautiful, and the art style is so iconic for Mad Magazine. I've got one from Christmas of 1956 that my dad gave to me. He got it when he was younger, so I've got it framed up in my basement. And I mean, the art style it's so iconic. So when you came on to Mad, was it, hey, this is our style? I know that, I don't know, something like The Simpsons, they have very specific rules for what they're, how you draw Homer. Was there a rule set for that when you got started?
Actually, quite the opposite. I took me a little time to get into Mad. Primarily, they told me because my work was a little too reminiscent of some of their classic artists, particularly Mort Drucker. I mean, at the time, I had been sort of working at getting into Mad, so what do you do when you want to do that? You look at old Mad magazines, right? So I had a lot of Mort influence in my work, and they were very, very specific about, we don't want people to have styles too similar to some of the more identifiable artists. We want new voices. So actually, I didn't get into Mad for a while because I was too close to their style.
Wow.
And so what I did is I put all those Mad magazines away, and I started working on the kind of storytelling and caricature stuff without actually looking at Mort's stuff and Jack's stuff and Wally Wood's stuff. And then eventually I was able to show them, something that's my voice and my visual look that's not, based on somebody that they already had, and then they gave me a shot. So I know a lot of people look at it and go, oh, this is very Mad Magazine, right? But really there's a big difference between what I do and what Mort does and what Sam Viviano does. And I mean, it's all caricature that's very likeness based and very linear, but in the end it's still our own take on it. So
do you remember what you presented to them that kind of got you across that threshold?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I was actually, I showed some stuff to them, to Sam Viviano particularly. He had just become the art director for Mad, and I wrote and drew a parody of the movie Godzilla with Matthew Broderick from 1997. So this was about 1998 maybe. I showed him this stuff, 99. And he said, yeah, it looks pretty good, but again with the Mort stuff. And so what I ended up doing is I showed that to Cracked magazine, that same thing.
Yeah,
they immediately published it.
Really?
Yeah. And then I ended up doing movie parodies for Cracked. And I did several of them. And the last one I did for Cracked was the movie Gladiator with Russell Crowe. And I finished it, and I went and showed it to Sam Viviano. I happened to be in New York for the Cartoonist Society Reuben Awards. And I showed it to him, and that was the piece that they were like, Oh, okay. So this is very much now you, and we'd love to have you work for MAD. They said we can't promise you when we'll give you a job, but we're definitely going to look into having you do something for us sometime soon. But there's a problem. You currently have bylines in cracked, like you're working for cracked. So you can't have a byline in cracked and MAD at the same time. And I said, well, that's no problem. I don't work for cracked anymore.
Yeah, that was just the one time.
Yeah, and they're like, because I'd done like 4 or 5 issues at that point, and they're like, well, when did that happen? And I said 3 seconds ago. They're like, well, wait a minute now. We can't tell you exactly when. I said that doesn't matter. It's that's like if you're playing single A ball in Pensacola and
the Yankees call you up.
The Yankees call you and say, hey, we want you to play in the bigs.
Absolutely.
You're like, you know what? I really love Pensacola.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that was a no-brainer. All right.
This is phenomenal. So what was the first thing? Let's break it down. Let's analyze it and make Ryan feel real bad about himself.
The first thing, I always look at the head shape.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's the absolute number one thing. So if you can exaggerate the head shape at all, away from that oval shape that everybody's got, then you're good to go from the get-go. So you've got a very long face. You got a big chin and jaw. You got like a pretty intense brow, and you got this little smirk. And so
always the smirk, yeah.
So that's it. That's tough to draw flat like that, but.
Well, you did an excellent job. I wish I was that good looking.
Tom,
that's the theme park thing, and I'm always playing for tips. So.
Yeah. Well, Tom, thanks so much for coming by. I'm sure we're just kicking off the con right now. I'm sure you got a line of people over at your booth. Where can people find you while they're here?
I'm in Artist Alley, booth H4.
Okay.
Yep, and be doing my usual thing, making fun of people and getting them to pay me for it.
Awesome.
That's the life.
Well, Tom, thanks a lot, guys.
Gig.
Remember, look for Tom's Kickstarter launches in about a month or so for Movie Parodies, a hardbound book. Find it on Kickstarter really, really soon. And stick around, guys, here on the Chumpcast and YouTube Chuckload of Comics for con coverage all weekend long. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. We'll see you around the con floor.